Welcome. How is everyone? No, that's a real question. How are you? Good, good, excellent. So hello, I am Jamie Bennett, and I am thrilled to welcome you to ArtPlace's annual summit. And before I do anything else, I want to just spend a moment to reflect on place, the concept of place. And over the past year, I've begun sort of seeing things that made me pay attention to the fact that that notion of taking a place-based approach lands differently in different conversations. And a lot of times when I'm talking with arts organizations, they're not necessarily used to thinking about their place-based community, right? Lots of arts organizations think about their community of peers, right? Who are the other theaters in a place? Who are the other museums? They think a lot about their communities of artists. They think a lot of their communities of supporters, of subscribers, of donors. But they don't always think about their physical neighbors and the relationship they can and do have with them. And on the community development side, on the government side, I've discovered that when you start talking about a place-based approach, one of the things that's really powerful about that is the way that it grounds you in the people who already are here in a place. There's a way that that place-based approach grounds you in the people who are already living, working, worshiping, and playing in a place. Because I think it's all too easy for us to design interventions, to design programs that are aimed at the people we might want to live at a place in the future. And yes, many of our places need to attract new populations, but we always need to begin by grounding ourselves in the people who are already there. But the other reason that I've begun thinking a lot about place is that there's this notion of authenticity. And what is the authentic identity of a place that begins popping up and informing our work? And I've realized that I'm not comfortable with that I find it somewhat problematic because it's usually used in the singular, right? That places have one identity that is authentic. And my experience is that we need to begin thinking of it in the plural. And we need to always be thinking about the authentic identities of a place. So as we're beginning this summit, as we're sort of starting our 3-day journey together today, I invite us all to think about the identity, the authentic identity of this place 500 years ago. 500 years ago, this place was cared for by members of the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Shawnee, and the Yuchi nations. And I would like to remind us that today, throughout the geography that I call the United States, there are 567 sovereign nations among us. And I've spent a lot of time in conversation with a lot of people in this room, making sure that when I talk about the work, when I think about the work, we get the language of working in rural communities and working in urban communities and working in suburban communities correct. But I haven't really thought about what it means to work transnationally. And I haven't really developed that language for working with members of the sovereign nations who share this geography with us. And we have a number of members of those nations with us today. So I want to think about those people, and I want to think about everyone over the past 500 years who have cared for this place. And I'm really thrilled that today we have one of the people who's charged with currently helping to take care of this place called Louisville. And that is the really extraordinary mayor, Greg Fisher. And I've been a big fan of Mayor Fisher's from a little bit of a distance for 7 years now, I think he's been in office. And because he's focused his time in office around thinking about lifelong learning and what does it really mean to make sure that learning is a constant process for everyone here. What does it mean to think about community health? What does it mean to think about that holistically? And what does it mean to think about compassion? And I realize that it is all too rare to hear a mayor actually speak about compassion and to hear that word come out of his mouth. So over the past 7 years, we've invested a little over $2 million in 7 projects here in Kentucky. And a lot of that is because of the conditions that Mayor Fisher and his administration and the people who are living here and the people who are working here are setting. So before we go any further, I'd like to welcome us to what we call Louisville Today. So please join me in welcoming Mayor Greg Fisher.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Louisville. See, this is where people are like, okay, how do you say it, right? Is it Louisville, Louisville? It's Louisville. So, okay, so it's Louisville. All right, ready? Louisville. Louisville. That's not bad. That's not bad. Now, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about our native drink in a minute, but you'll find if you have a few bourbons, put some marbles in your mouth, Louisville comes out really easy, all right? Well, y'all going to have a fantastic time here over the next couple of days, and I'm really honored that you guys chose to come to our city. You're going to see how much the arts mean to Louisville and how much placemaking means to our city as well. Your all's mission, we are totally on board with. The arts to help strengthen the social, physical, and economic fabric of a community. You can be really intentional about it and lean into it and see all the celebration that comes out of that and the new relationships that come out about it, or just kind of let it happen by itself and really not maximize the possibility about it, especially in the world we're living in today. Your all's mission really aligns beautifully with one of our city values. And I was mentioning our city value of compassion. And our city value of compassion guides the work we do to build what I call our social muscles. You ever notice how, when cities face different challenges, or, it could be an explosion, it could be an officer-involved shooting, it could be defacing of a place of worship, what happens? Some cities kind of turn in on each other and start fighting. Some are angry with the world, and then others say, how are we going to get through this together? And I call all of those interactions and kind of coming together around the values of a city, around compassion, kindness, and love, these human values that we're all born with. You lean into those, what you find out is we're all in this together, right? And then that's what builds social muscle. So when we have these challenges, we can get through them together. And these obviously are pretty unusual and challenging times in our country right now. And what we would used to think would be a conversation maybe we'd be having with people to exchange different points of view, now it's become a shouting match or people blaming each other, people kind of pulling away from each other instead of coming together each other and finding that common identity that we have that's so important to us as a country. We are in a time where there are so-called leaders that are specifically using strategies around division and derision instead of unity, instead of compassion. But we've got to know not just where we've been as a country, but also where we're going as a country and what all of our history means, all of the history means, and what aspects of our history deserve to be celebrated, but also what aspects of our history deserve to be explored more, especially by the majority white population, to understand the impact on those of us that were not of this particular hue. Our city has been a big part of that conversation. A couple of examples. 2 years ago, before Charlottesville, we had a large obelisk in our city that was a monument to the Confederate war dead. It was on a public street near the campus of the University of Louisville. And that kind of began our conversation about race and history, Civil War, slavery, all these things that a lot of people were hesitant to talk about, but needed to be talked about. So to me, that obelisk was an insult to the 7,000, 8,000 African-American students at University of Louisville who had to walk by that obelisk every day on the way to class. And could you imagine if you're, let's say, a little girl that's 8 years old, a little African-American girl that's 8 years old, and you've got your dad taking you for a walk, and she asks you one day, Dad, what's that all about there? And then that conversation starts. Well, that's to honor some people. There was a civil war in the country, and, some people say it was about states' rights, but it was really about the right to own slaves, and slaves were African Americans, like our great-great-grandparents, and you could buy and sell people like you could buy cattle, and then you would breed them, and then they could be sold down the river, and when they went down the river, no telling what type of horrible things would happen to them right away, and the little girl would say, well, Dad, why would we want to honor anybody like that? That's a really kind of fundamental question that I think is really not that difficult to answer. Now, it's part of our history. I get that. But there's a difference between being part of our history and then celebrating that aspect of our history as well. So we've got to remember it, but we don't have to honor it, and we don't have to glorify it. And of course, we've seen many challenges since that was about 2 years ago from us, but the further south you got, the more and more intense the conversation became. And this Ohio River right over here, which is literally 100 yards that way, you know, is kind of known as the gateway to the south. And if you were enslaved, if you got across that river, you know, you were going to be free. So the symbolism of this land right here, this place, not just the Shawnees and the Cherokees, but what this meant to people of color and white people in the history of our country is extraordinarily intense. So where do we go on this as a city? You know, you could say we're just going to remove an obelisk, or are we going to leave it at that? Because it engendered quite a bit of emotions. But last year, after the violence in Charlottesville, I said we've got to really take a look at every piece of public art that we have in our community. There's 1 to 3 that can be translated a couple different ways right now. But what I wanted was a process so that when we take a look at any display of public art, that we could look at that through a lens of equity, through a lens of fairness. So we created a Public Art and Monuments Advisory Committee. Its work will be done here in the next month or two. And its job is to consider the historical representations depicted in our city's existing public art and monuments and help ensure that our public spaces are actually welcoming and reflective of the diverse community that we have that's only going to get more diverse. And that's an incredible opportunity, not just for our city, but for our country as well, to show the rest of the world, and for our city to show other cities, how do you embrace diversity in all of its splendor and say, we are proud, and that is one of our competitive advantages as a font of creativity and opportunity for everybody else. So leaning into these conversations is really important. And you'll hear more about that. I'd like to thank our friends at the Americans for the Arts who are here today for reaching out and supporting this work by sharing resources and helping to connect us with other city leaders who are having similar conversations with their communities around statues, obelisks, public art, et cetera, so that we learn together as a country as we go through this process as well. And we've got a lot to learn. You know, it's an interesting point. The Germans, starting in 3rd grade, they teach their kids, their students, about the Holocaust. And they are very explicit that this was a national shame, and we will never repeat that again. And then think about what we do in our country. It is totally glossed over in our history books. And not just slavery itself, but then fast forward to Jim Crow, fast forward to redlining, fast forward to urban renewal, where you all will be going tomorrow night, where the Center for African American Heritage is in the Russell neighborhood. The Russell neighborhood was once known as the Harlem of the South because it was thick with black-owned businesses and nightclubs, restaurants. And if you were in the South, that's where you wanted to come. But then urban renewal comes along and actually wipes out the entire kind of nightlife and all that beauty of Russell. You'll be going there tomorrow. Now, we've got about $1 billion of investment going into Russell right now to repair what previous governments have done, but it's really shameful when you think about what we've done to ourselves. So your all's opportunity, and I've seen it in a lot of your work, and I've seen it in the work that has been funded in our city, is how do we use the arts to not just represent the soul of a city, but also to represent the conscience of a city? And then how do we integrate the voices of our citizens, particularly those that historically are not being heard? And that's why the arts are so essential to all of our cities, and we all know that. We're going through a real renaissance in Louisville right now with $13 billion of construction taking place in our city right now. We've got a problem is we don't have enough people moving here to fill all the jobs that we have open right now. So if any of y'all are looking to move to a great city and have a great job, you know, please come to our city. But we generate about $500 million in economic activity from our arts every year, and it continues to grow because we're growing our hospitality, our tourism sector. We had about 16 million tourist visits last year, concerts, museums, theaters, art shows, et cetera. So we've got a lot of momentum in that area. Now, we also have something else that nobody else has. It's partly called with the culinary arts, but we call it bourbonism, okay? So, you know, what you want to have as a city or as a business is, what do we have that nobody else has? Well, you all should know that 95% of the world's bourbon is distilled in Kentucky. Do you know what the other 5% is called? Counterfeit. That's right, okay? So you want to stay away from that. So what we said is, you know, people go to Napa Valley for wine. You know, why don't we create a bourbon and local food scene? Because hopefully you'll be able to get out and enjoy our restaurants. We're always in the top 5 in the country in terms of best local food and best restaurant scenes. So you put together bourbon and our local food scene, that's what we call bourbonism. So it's a little funny, but it's true, okay? Now, I didn't know if it was going to work when we decided to do it, but it is going gangbusters. We've got 20 hotels under construction in our city right now. One is that we have an expanding convention center, and then you put bourbonism on top of that. So it's developed into a place-making strategy of ours. It's developed into a wonderful architectural addition to our city, because the bourbon industry, when they do something, it's always a 4- and 5-star experience. So whether it's adaptive reuse of these beautiful buildings we have along Main Street here, or some striking new architecture with cathedrals where bourbon is being, glass cathedrals where bourbon is being distilled in it, it's having a significant impact on the placemaking of our city. So I would encourage you all to do some field research while you're here, and you might find some inspiration in bourbonism while you're here in our city. But every city's got that own unique placemaking aspect of it, and that's one of ours here as well. So we're proud of what's going on. We got tremendous momentum in our city, but also just before I want to close, we also have challenges, okay? I'm not one just to get up here and just tell you, this is great, we're the greatest city. I think we are the greatest city, but part of being a great city is being truthful, too, about challenges. We can have challenges with public safety. We always want to be a healthier city. We want to make sure every child comes to kindergarten to learn from day one. This is a huge national problem that we have, not just in our city, but every city. How do we overcome prejudice and discrimination in all parts of our city? And then how do we open more paths to economic opportunity for every citizen? Social mobility is at a 50-year low in our country, and that is shameful. We say we're the richest country on the face of the world, and we are. But how do we measure wealth? We need to be changing the definition of how we measure wealth. Food security, housing security, healthcare security, where everybody has an opportunity. And art has a huge role to play in this in terms of elevating the consciousness of our people so they're looking at these things as matters of equity. Like ArtPlace America, we believe in the power of partnerships and bringing people together to take on these challenges. And that's why we've worked with our local Fund for the Arts, which is our regional arts and community development organization, along with partners from government and business, artists, and arts and cultural organizations to create what we call the Imagine Greater Louisville 2020 plan. And Imagine Greater Louisville 2020 maps out, through the arts and the lens of equity, how we can get to be where we want to be as a city. So we want to be a city where every child in every neighborhood has every chance to reach their full human potential. And that's how we define our city value of compassion. The respect for each and every citizen so their full human potential is thriving, flourishing, where you see people walking around like Thomas Merton, who had his epiphany here. You see people shining like the sun. Everybody, no matter who they are, whether you know them or not, everybody has the potential, and you see that beauty of them shining like the sun. So our arts community is a critical partner, obviously, to help us reach this goal. And we believe in the transformative power of art. We see that all the time in our cultural experiences. I want to thank J.P. Davis and his team from the Fund for the Arts for their leadership and partnership. They've been invaluable. In our city budget process, which we're in the middle of right now, we're investing $200,000 in Imagine Greater Louisville 2020, half of which will support a program to create a series of one-of-a-kind murals throughout our city, and all of which, the entire $200,000, will be matched with a donation from our partners in the Jennifer Lawrence Foundation. So Jen is from Louisville and has really helped us lean in to these issues around equity and the arts. So we're really inspired by her commitment as a young philanthropist here to help the arts in our city. And then we're also emphasizing the arts in a new initiative we're planning called Lean Into Louisville. This will be a years-long series of presentations, conversations, and art initiatives that will explore historic factors behind inequality and discrimination in our city, in our country. And we'll explore how Louisville can create more access and more opportunities for all of our citizens. And I love having these conversations because they make people squirm in their seats. And when you see people squirming, it means they're learning something. It might be something that they're not comfortable with, but what we find out is the more you have these conversations, the more people are ready to enter the conversation, because it's a process. So you have to start, and then you have to keep going. One of the great artists in world history, the filmmaker Akira Kurosawa, once said, being an artist means never averting your eyes. And it's easy to turn your eyes away from something that can make you fearful or something that can make you upset. But I think that a great city and great citizens should show that they follow that same philosophy. And we cannot avert our eyes from the injustices and inequalities of the past. I mentioned them: slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, urban renewal, or the impact that they're still having on our cities and our country here today. We won't look away from that type of racism. We won't look away from sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, past or present. And that includes the tragic action of government officials, public servants who somehow decided they only needed to serve part of the public. Well, how convenient for them, and how badly misdirected. So we lean in to all of these issues here in our city, and we lean into conversations that might be tough in the moment, but we know that they will carry us forward as a city. And that's what Lean Into Louisville is all about. And our arts and artists and art organizations are critical to that effort, just like they're critical to the unique character of our city. Because Lean Into Louisville is a partnership with our metro government, the Muhammad Ali Center. I hope you get to visit that. Louisville Free Public Library, schools, businesses, faith communities. And so we're in the final stages of getting to launch. We're still working with local and National Foundation partners to determine our programming options. And if any of y'all would like to find out more about our plans with Lean Into Louisville as an artist or as a funder, please let us know. Specifically, in Louisville, we want more public art that honors today's values: compassion, equity, innovation, globalization. And Louisville wants public art that celebrates people who look like today's community: black, brown, white, male, female, young, old, and public art that challenges how we view the world. So I urge you to help us further beautify every neighborhood of our city by investing in public art right here in the great city of Louisville. So I hope you all have an inspiring visit here in our city. Our place will welcome you. Our people will welcome you. You'll see that as well. And if there's anything I can do at all from our office to help while you're here, please do let us know. So enjoy your stay in Louisville, and please come back. Thank you.
So a mayor who promotes tactical bourbonism and quotes Kurosawa. I'm ready to move to Louisville. All right, so what I wanted to do for sort of the next 15 minutes is to spend a little time talking about the one thing that everyone in this room has in common, which is ArtPlace. And one of the things that's sort of most exciting about this summit, what's most exciting about our work, is that we tend to pull together communities of folks who are unexpectedly in rooms together, and that's who all of you are. And we've spent a lot of time as a staff over the last year and a half, thinking back over the first 7 years of ArtPlace's existence, and then thinking ahead about what the work looks like between now and 2020. And I don't think that anything I'm about to share with you will be a major surprise. In fact, many of you have had conversations with us about it and sort of know it. But I wanted to sort of put this into the room so that you'll carry it in your head with you as you sort of travel across the next 2 days, and as we think together, as we learn together, as we share together, to help us better do the work that's ahead. So, when ArtPlace began in 2011, I think everyone remembers that we were kicked off by this white paper from the NEA that was called, imaginatively enough, Creative Placemaking. And back then, ArtPlace was a very different organization than we were today, right? I think in many ways we were trying to find our community and we were trying to find our way. And we did a lot of that by investing dollars from our foundation partners into the work that everyone in this room was doing on the ground. How were we bringing artists into conversation with the housing sector? How were we bringing artists into conversation with business improvement districts? How are we sort of making sure that all of our neighbors are working together towards a shared future? And that work set the stage for what we've been doing, I would say, over the last 4 years, which is really about sort of organizing and formalizing the work that's ahead of us. And a lot of that has been around thinking about the very specific ways that we're able to categorize the work that each of you is doing. How do we sort of think about the transportation projects together? How do we think of those of you who are working in parks and in open spaces? How do we think about how all of that work happens? And what we've done over the past year, in part, is to work with a group called the Bridgespan organization. And the Bridgespan folks invented a framework called the Strong Field Framework. And as usual, this is, I think, true of every consulting practice, they got paid huge amounts of money to come up with common sense, right? And that's good, actually, right? Because what they created actually for the Irvine Foundation, for some linked learning work that they were doing in California, was something that reflected how folks lived in the world, right? In order to have a field of practice, you need a shared identity. Once you have a group of people with a shared identity, in order to flourish, that group of people needs some sort of shared knowledge. They need some shared standards of practice. We need to make sure that we're investing in both leaders and grassroots practitioners. And we need to make sure that philanthropy and policy and public funding are all lined up to make that work happen. So what we did, one of the first things that Bridgespan did through a series of surveys, through a series of conversations, was to make sure that we were clear on what that shared identity was, because in many ways that's the building block. And what's interesting is as we've been doing that work, we've come back to the Policy Link white paper that's around arts, culture, and equitable development. And what we realized that the group of people we were convening, the group of people we are calling to the same party, what we all have in common is that we are committed to a world where we create communities that are even healthier, even more equitable, even more sustainable than the ones we have today. And we believe that artists have a set of knowledge, skills, and ability to bring to that work that helps the work happen more effectively, more efficiently, and for more of a population. And so does that identity, those of us who are committed to equitable, healthy, sustainable futures, who believe that artists have a very clear role to play in that, is that who we are as a room? Yes? Right? Okay, good, right? We paid a lot of money for common sense, right? So it better be true. And so one of the things that was interesting to me was sort of poking and prodding how artists are welcomed into those conversations. And I realized, and many of you have heard me share some of this before, that for a long time, artists were welcomed into community development as interior decorators. Right? We have really hard, important work to do, and if we have a couple days left over and some dollars at the end, we can put a bird on it, right? Artists were sort of welcomed in that way. Now, artists are smart, artists are transgressive, artists always did more than that. And so one of the things we've been doing is to borrow from Liz Lerman, an extraordinary dance maker who's at Arizona State University, who talks about the need to unpack the hidden rigors of artists. Right? How is it that we learn what artists do that is also useful to other people in a way that is legible to those other people? And the example I've been giving is that every neo-urbanist, every urban thinker, every planner is talking about the need to do rapid prototyping, right? How do you do something, put it up quickly, get instant feedback, make changes, try it again, and keep going, right? What do we call that in the theater? Rehearsal. We've been doing it for 4,000 years. We don't need to reinvent it. And our colleagues from the Cook Inlet Housing Authority are here, who sort of took that one step further in a way that I love, and they actually commissioned a theater set designer to create a one-to-one model of what a new apartment would look like, and members of the public could actually walk in and see the space, right? And the space was created $50, some 2x4, a little luan, and you could move the walls around, you could move the windows around, right? Artists know how to do rapid prototyping. We're always looking for ways to do distributed leadership, right? How do we do community-led? How do we distribute power, right? Margaret Leoy is here, who will tell us that that's called chamber ensembles, right? How do you make music together without a conductor, right? We know how to do the organizing, we know how to do that work. And so artists need to be welcomed in powerfully. But one of the things that I realize that is bad on me over the last 4 years is I think that I was trained as a fundraiser, so I'm fundamentally a salesman, right? And I know how to overpromise like nobody's business. And one of the things I've been guilty of is sort of overpromising what it is that artists can do. And so a friend recently sent me a picture of this pot, which is made by a British ceramicist called Grayson Perry, to sort of remind me to settle down a little bit. And this pot is called "This Pot Will Reduce Crime by 29%. So, artists are not interior decorators, but they are also not silver bullets. And so the language that we're trying out, the language that we've been using, is how do we bring artists as allies into the work of community development? How do we bring them in as someone who can work alongside the other folks who are also doing it? How do we create a community of equals? I am the child of a former editor of Highlights for Children and an elementary school librarian, so I think a lot about stone soup. Right? Do you remember this children's book, right? Someone shows up with a giant kettle, you put a stone in it, one person shows up with a rutabaga, one shows up with a carrot, one shows up with a ham hock, and all of a sudden you have a delicious meal, right? That's our vision, right? Artists are just the ones bringing rutabagas, right? The transportation engineers are bringing potatoes. The housing developers are bringing the ham hock. That's what we're looking to do, and that's what we're looking to test out. So, what is the work ahead of us, right? What is it that we're actually going to do with that? I sort of have gone back and forth about different ways to talk about this. So the thing that I think is a question that many people, some in this room, more outside this room, have, is what is ArtPlace going to be doing with project funding going forward, right? And the short, easy answer is we're not going to be doing it. And the reason we're not going to be doing it is that we've got 2.5 years left. And if our work is to really grow the field of people who are committed to creating equitable, healthy, sustainable communities in allyship with artists, with arts organizations, we think that the investment we need to make are in knowledge and in networks. And hopefully everyone in this room recognizes these 4 covers as 4 of the field scans we've released. Jamie Han, Danya Sherman, and our colleagues at ArtPlace and in other organizations have been taking a look at 10 sectors of community planning and development one by one. And we've essentially been saying, all right, what is the history of the work at the intersection of arts, culture, and take, for example, public safety? Who are the folks who have been doing that? What does that look like, right? What are the issues that are most pressing for that sector moving forward? And in the case of public safety, it was something around hotspot policing. It was something around police-community relations. It was something around community reentry, returning citizens. And it was something around positive engagement of youth, right? And there's a lot of work that's happened in all of those. So we know we've got a lot of rich source material. So what we did is we took a look then and said, okay, where is it that offices of public safety are already gathering with an intention of learning to work differently? And we stumbled upon our colleagues at LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation. And the reason we stumbled upon them is that they are the national technical assistance provider for the Department of Justice. They used to be called the Byrne Criminal Justice Innovation Grants. I can't remember what they were renamed, but I still know them as BCJI. And they regularly convene offices of public safety and share with them new ways of working. So we're in the process of commissioning 4 cases, one from Brownsville, Brooklyn, one from the Village of Arts and Humanities that we'll hear a little bit more about on Wednesday, I think, one from Milwaukee, and one from Alameda County. And we're actually going to embed them in the work that LISC does, not as a standalone thing, but is essentially as a new chapter in the textbook they're already using, right? LISC has already built a tremendous infrastructure of gathering people together and getting them in the habit of learning together. And so now we're essentially adding a new chapter to that textbook. And we're doing that work with Transportation for America in the transportation sector. We're doing that work with NeighborWorks America for housing. We're doing that work with the US Water Alliance and with GRIST for energy and the environment. And that way of working, asking the question, who is it that we're trying to reach? Where are they already gathered? And how do we add a chapter to their ongoing textbook is really going to be the thing that illuminates our work going forward. So we're going to continue, everyone I think has seen what we technically call the Community Development's Matrix, but I lovingly call the bingo card because I was raised Catholic, so that is always bingo to me. But we're going to continue marching through those 10 sectors and keep doing that work. We're going to do it for immigration. We're going to do it for public health. We're going to do it for education and youth. We're going to march through all the sectors, agriculture and food. But in addition to that, there are 3 other areas that we're going to start thinking a great deal about. The first is thinking about those of us who are committed to doing comprehensive community planning and development, right? That siloed approach is very important because there are people who wake up every day and say, yes, I work in transportation. I go to transportation meetings, I think transportation thoughts. So we need to reach them. But there are also folks who are mayors, who are deputy mayors, who are policy advisors. There are community development corporations. There are all sorts of government and nonprofit organizations that think comprehensively. And some of that work is going to be teed off by the extraordinary work that our 6 colleague organizations in whom we've made community development investments are doing. And you'll have a chance to visit with them over the course of the next few days. And our colleagues at Policy Link, who are also here, are going to help scrape those lessons from that work and share them with those audiences in the places that they already gather. And it was actually when we were teeing up this work that we were sort of able to be affirmed in our decision about following the lead that Jamie Hand and Danya have been setting with the research work, because our first impulse, right, we are a creature born of philanthropy, so the thing that is most natural to us is white papers, right? And we very proudly went to our colleagues at the Bloomberg Foundation, for whom I used to work, and said to them, listen, we're going to reach mayors, we're going to teach them a brand new way of working, and we're going to do it by publishing white papers, right? And Kate Levin, my former boss, patted me gently on the head and sort of said, you know, Jamie, no mayor has ever been confronted with a snowstorm or a transit strike and reached for a white paper, right? Stop making them, no one reads them. And so that's when we sort of began getting affirmed in this idea of asking ourselves, where is it that mayors are already gathering? Where is it that city managers convene? Where is it that county executives? Where is it that tribal governments come together to do this work? In addition to that, we've been overly focused, and I think, again, this has largely been my fault, on the community planning and development side of the equation. And one of the questions that we want to start asking more of is, what is the knowledge, what are the tools, what are the convenings that are needed on the arts and cultural side, right? I think arts organizations are going to be key and relatively easy to reach because there's already a tradition of gathering. I think local arts agencies are going to be relatively easy to reach because there's a tradition of convening, there's a tradition of gathering, there's a tradition of webinars, right? Individual artists are very much a big question for us because I've never met an artist who doesn't iterate her practice, who doesn't do that daily, but she doesn't do it sitting in a hotel ballroom with 500 other people, right? So there's a different way of learning with individual artists, and we want to understand that better, and we want to support it. And then the third bucket, the third thing that we're thinking about is higher education. And I think what's interesting about higher education is that we have to think of its role in research, right? Because what is it that universities do well? They organize and disseminate knowledge, right? So how do we make sure that we're embedding the knowledge of the people in this room in institutions of higher education? Why do we want to do that? Because colleges and universities teach people, right? They teach future practitioners and they teach current practitioners, right? So we want to make sure it's embedded there. And many, many, many of our colleges and universities own great deals of real estate. So they themselves are community development entities, even though not enough of them think of themselves that way. And so how do we also make sure that universities are practicing what it is that they are researching, right? So we're going to think and continue the work with the 10 sectors of community planning and development on the bingo card. We're going to think about how to reach the folks that don't work within silos, but who work comprehensively, holistically. We're going to think about reaching the arts and culture sector, and we're not going to confuse arts organizations, local arts agencies, and individual artists. And we're going to think about higher ed. And in addition to that, there is the bit of work ahead that we're still trying to figure out how to effectively describe, right? And the work here is that my experience of creative placemaking at its best is that it is a local incarnation of this national conversation that we're having, right? We come together across the country, across our sectors, across our geographies. We learn from each other. We figure out what each other are doing. We get inspired by what Cook Inlet Housing is doing. We get inspired by the Village of Arts and Humanities. But then we go back to the place we call home. We go back to the place where we live, work, worship, and play, and we do the work there. And one of the things that has been a joy about the ArtPlace work is that about half of our foundation partners are national, and about half of our foundation partners have a geographic focus. And that's really helped us in understanding that balance between local incarnation and national conversation. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing over the next 6 months is to pick a set of geographies where we think we can invest some resources to strengthen the local ecosystem of creative placemaking. Now, we're not yet prepared to announce what those geographies are, but if you go to the ArtPlace website and look at our foundation partners, you can make some pretty educated guesses, right? There are some places where there is an ongoing philanthropic ecosystem that we are going to double down on in some way. And the thing that our colleagues have been doing, and Liz Crane, who's the deputy director who's been running the Community Development Investment Program, and Javier Torres, who recently left us to join the Surdna Foundation, and I'll get a chance to thank him publicly for his work tomorrow, when he does that, really pushed us on that if we really believe in lifting up local knowledge, we have to put our money where our mouth is. So what we want to do is we want to develop a new way of how philanthropy works, where we take the bucket of money that we have to invest in a local ecosystem and actually give it to the local ecosystem to have them decide what to do with it, right? How do we sort of cede control of the dollars and then show up to offer any additional sort of knowledge or connections that are useful, but in a way that there's actually local ownership? And what we are a 10-year fund, so we are not permanently endowed, but this is kind of the equivalent of not making grants through interest, but actually turning over principal, right? What does it look like to actually turn the principal over to the communities and have the communities decide the best way to do it? So that's what we're going to be doing over the next 2.5 years. We're going to be thinking about knowledge. We're going to be thinking about investing it in networks, and we're going to be thinking about how to make sure that local ecosystems get connected to those national conversations.